can you just tell me, who you are, what's your role at Patchstack, and what's your background? Because that might be relevant for this case study.
Yeah. So I'm a security researcher at Patchstack. We work with WordPress vulnerabilities and such. So background, do you want like professional? Like, yeah, I was at Sakuri. I've done WordPress.
I think is it fair to say you're a general WordPress security expert? Because you don't only
Yeah.
do vulnerabilities, do you?
Yeah, no,
Like,
I'd say it's probably fair.
yeah. Because what did you do at Sakuri that anything that wasn't hush hush and like the black ops?
Yeah, the never that cool.
Yeah,
Primarily remediation. So like we'd fix the stuff after things happened. So we'd see like the impact of it.
yeah. So like malware, like cleanups basically, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I guess
exactly.
scanning, which is what Sakuri is like known for.
Yeah, they clean things up.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And how much of that cleanup was with WordPress versus?
99%.
But let's very smoothly go into the vulnerability aspect because that is, I mean, security posture is also a thing. You kind of at this point we kind of expect people to just like not use pizza123 as a password. We kind of expect it to do the basic things, although they don't. But
They do.
vulnerabilities is something that's a little harder to protect against. So why are we here today? Is that we for a long time, like we've known that vulnerabilities are quite difficult in the WordPress case to protect against these exploits. And a few months ago, actually earlier this year, we did a case study where we tested about I believe it was 11 vulnerabilities against about 5 hosting providers to see like if the different defense combinations that they advertise as secure were actually effective at preventing vulnerabilities. And what we found was alarming, but not surprising, because what we found was that 88% of those defenses failed to block. Well, 88% of those attacks were not blocked at all by hosting providers. So that's not good. Obviously, that's a pretty high fail rate, right? Um, but obviously, we decided to do like a little deeper test the second time around. So right about now, we're finalizing at the time of recording this the second experiment. Um, and can you give me an overview of like what did we do different like second time around, and what were the results from that experiment?
Yeah, absolutely. So the initial experiment was pretty small in scale. It was 5 hosts, it was 11 vulnerabilities. Uh, there was really only like one vulnerability of each type tested. We focused on primarily big name vulnerabilities, ones that you would have seen in the news, ones that we're using on like millions of sites, the really big players. For test number two, we wanted to expand that scope. We wanted to go more broad rather than specific. We expanded to, I think at the end we have 19 hosts that we tested, and we have 30 vulnerabilities, including the original 11, or original 10 minus one that was kind of breaking sometimes. So we have 30 vulnerabilities total, 19 different hosts, and this is making up a much bigger volume of vulnerabilities. Instead of just one of each type, we're doing two or three different types so we can get a better idea of, okay, they're not blocking this particular vulnerability, but are they maybe blocking others in this category and it just missed that? Or are they
Right.
not catching anything from this variety?
Yeah.
What we found is that roughly 75% of all the attacks we performed succeeded,
Hmm.
which this is pretty much what we expected. The original test focused a bit more heavily on WordPress specific vulnerabilities because the really big name vulnerabilities are ones that are directly hitting WordPress.
But like, what's the difference between like a WordPress specific vulnerability and a more generic one? I guess like in layman's terms.
A general vulnerability affects different types of software. SQL injection, for example, is it's an injection into the database. Basically, every website has a database. It doesn't matter if you're WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, some weird homebrewed thing. It probably uses a database.
Yeah.
And these types of vulnerabilities are very generic in that it doesn't matter what platform you're running. If you're vulnerable to it and you send a certain styled command through HTTP, you can get hit.
Yeah.
So higher level layers that don't know WordPress specifically can still look for like SQL injection because they know what
Yeah.
it looks like. WordPress specific is going to be more of, say, you've got a plugin that only allows administrative users to do a certain action. On a higher level, on like the firewall level, it has no clue what a WordPress administrator is. It doesn't know what this user is, if they're an admin or logged in or not logged in. It has no idea. So that's an application specific problem because you have to have the context of what's going on, not only in the WordPress code, but on that live site itself to see whether or not it's a vulnerability.
So the reason I'm asking that is, I get it. Like, WordPress is like a whole box of things. You have to like see into the platform to sort of understand like what might be wrong with it. If I'm like oversimplifying it, it's weird because I expected too that the simple attacks, the ones that we've all heard about, they would be successfully blocked. So that's what really struck me as well was that was it really that bad?
It was pretty bad. We did see some providers that were blocking more on average of those types of varieties, of those types of vulnerabilities, but nobody did it perfectly. There were plenty of hosts that didn't really do it at all. It was a very wide range of results, but it generally trended towards most hosts were really blocking either nothing or next to nothing. One thing I found, two things I thought was surprising. On the good side, we saw very little disparity between small and big hosts.
Mm.
Like I expected going into this that your really big hosts, I mean, they have a lot more money. They have a lot more power to throw resources at a problem. I expected they would consistently be performing much higher. But what we're actually seeing is, regardless if it's a very large host or a moderately small host, they're all roughly equal. In fact, some of our top two performers, one actually was a very big name host and one was a very small host. So that surprised me. Even on a smaller side, companies that are actually trying to invest in this and trying to do well are able to, I don't want to say do amazing because nobody did great, but do much better than you would have expected.
So I'm a marketing guy. My personal sense is that cybersecurity marketing is very good. The substance is not that good. So, but it's digging into that a little bit, and yes, like a lot of hosts do say that we offer security, but it's quite abstract on the surface. It's like, oh, we do this thing. Don't worry about it. We got this. Um, but digging a bit deeper into like where there some defense combinations or defensive setups more effective than others, like at blocking vulnerabilities specifically.
That's an interesting question, and it's actually a little hard to answer. What we found is that all of the commercial solutions were very bad. The big name solutions that every company has used, I think over half of the hosts that we tested used Immunify 360, for example, and
Right. So
the results
I
were
was
all
gonna
over the
ask, like,
place.
what do you mean by commercial solution?
So there's a few big commercial name providers. Immunify
Right.
360 offers server level protections. There's companies like Cloudflare that offer a cloud firewall. Now, the cloud firewall, some of them actually do pretty decent. But Immunify 360, for example, we saw that on over half of our hosts. And in other tests, we've seen it a lot. And
Yeah.
it seems like it doesn't really change the results. The worst performer and the best performer both use Immunify 360. So there are some products which they're there and they do a specific thing, but it's not this thing. And that happens a lot. Outside of that, the biggest differentiator is it's called a WAF or a firewall or a securities thing. Every company names their own a little different. But what we found is most companies that were doing good are running some sort of a proprietary WAF.
No, yeah. I was just gonna, so basically just like rules, like basically more rules.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, it seems like basically they're making a firewall that can just has more rules or has better rules. It's hard to find specifics there, but one way or another, they're making a better firewall product that they're using internally.
But so, somebody maybe who's a novice, or like me, like, relatively not that informed about cybersecurity, I would say, okay, keep adding rules. So
Yeah.
can we conceivably, if we keep adding rules to firewalls, like can we eventually end up with a super solid working product?
Yes and no. When it comes to the generic vulnerabilities, your SQL injections and similar, those we can eventually generally add enough rules that 90% of cases get blocked. That's very conceivable. It's doable because
Yeah.
those are generic. So there's a pattern you can search for.
Yeah.
When it comes to the application layer, when it comes to the WordPress-specific vulnerabilities, every single plugin has its own type of vulnerability. Every vulnerable plugin, sorry, but they all
Right.
have their own unique vulnerability. It's not the same between any two instances, and they all work very specifically. Even ignoring the part where for something like a broken access control, an administrator can do it, a subscriber can't do it. Ignoring the part where we'd have to figure out those privilege differences, if you were to try and add a rule to block every single WordPress vulnerability, you'd end up with tens of thousands of rules. You'd end up with
Yeah.
a crazy amount.
Going to vulnerabilities for a second, it's like when we look at the results of the experiment, were there like what were like the hardest vulnerabilities and exploits to protect against?
There's two answers there. The absolute hardest is cross-site request forgery. This is
Yeah.
just because the way that it works, it's very difficult to ensure that you're preventing false positives without breaking the content. That one, exactly nobody, not even us, block that one because the risk of
I
false
was gonna
positives
get
is
to that. I
so
was gonna
high.
get to that. Patchstack did not get a perfect score. Like we blocked all of the vulnerabilities in that test except two cross-site request forgery ones. So I did want to get to that. So that's that's one of my questions. But I'll let you continue.
We can come back to that
What's the
one.
excuse? What's the excuse?
The quick answer there is the false positive is really high there. Cross-site
Okay.
request forgery is when someone sends you a link to a third-party website and it redirects you back to yours and makes you do something bad. It's really hard to go, are they intentionally doing something bad? Are they coming from somewhere else? What's going on there? So blocking that more likely than not means a ton of false positives or things
Mhm.
that are normally not very severe vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
So that was the hardest to block, but also one of the least impactful. 90% of CSRF attacks, it's going to be changing a setting in a specific plugin.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense now. So that I get that. But okay, so let's say okay, so that's hard to defend against because it's just very specific and it's just like, if you do, you have to block basically a lot of stuff you don't want to block. But in terms of like dangerousness or like what's like the most dangerous vulnerability, I guess that's hard to defend against, but also has the most sort of potential to be mass exploited.
So that one's definitely going to be privilege escalation. Privilege escalation vulnerabilities are sort of like a specific niche within broken access control type vulnerabilities. And that is all WordPress application specific. So
Right.
that's getting into that layer of you can't make a generic rule against it. You can't say anything that looks like this, we're going to block. You have to know specifically how is this plugin supposed to work? What are the attackers doing that's not supposed to happen?
Mhm.
And how can we block that without blocking what it's supposed to do? So essentially, these were never blocked. Um, I believe outside of us, who, of course, we do make specific to the plugin rules,
Right.
nobody else blocked the vast majority. Out of the 4 different privilege escalation vulnerabilities we tested, and out of all of the hosts we tested, there were only 5 instances of any of these vulnerabilities being blocked, and not one company blocked all 4 of these tests. It's very common, and what privilege escalation generally means is someone gets administrator access on your site, which at that
Yeah.
point they can change all your content. If you're, say, running an e-commerce shop like WooCommerce, they can access all your customers' data. More
Right.
likely than not, they can upload plugins so they can put their own malicious code on your website. They can do anything they want.
So one other thing I wanted to kind of scrutinize about that test is that I believe there was at least one vulnerability that we tested, as part of this thing, and it was I think about 2 years old. So my question there is like, why would we care about a 2-year-old vulnerability? Because my assumption is if a vulnerability is 2 years old, I'm assuming 99% of the users will already have updated it. And is did we skew the results of the experiment by including like one or two like really old ones? Because I think that's my question.
So that's an interesting question. I think there's kind of 2 parts to that. Number 1, the number isn't 99%. I think it's closer to like I believe
Yeah.
the number is closer to like 80% of users are updated. But still, when we're talking about WordPress, which has
Mm,
millions of sites, if there's
mm,
20% of users who haven't updated, that's still tens of thousands of sites.
yeah.
Still a big number just by the scale of things. On top
Yeah.
of that, though, a lot of users don't update. Now, of
Yeah.
course, people who are really maintaining their site or who have like a web team or who have an e-commerce site and they're getting a lot of active customers, more likely than not, they're probably keeping things updated. But for
Yeah.
the 10,000 mom and pop shops who they just need a website to go, hey, we exist, they're
Yeah.
probably not updating that. And that's what we've seen is a lot of people aren't updating. Um,
Yeah.
WordPress has been for years now trying to push do auto updates. Hosting companies have been trying to push do auto updates.
Yeah.
A lot of them don't set that as default, or if they do, a lot of customers are grandfathered into it's not default. And that's
Yeah.
not even accounting in all of the custom code or paid plugins where,
Mhm.
hey, if you want the updates, which includes this vulnerability fix, you gotta pay us again.
So you mentioned that that, people reverse engineer, like news goes out, new vulnerability, everybody now knows about it. So how fast would a good hacker be able to weaponize that vulnerability from the moment of finding out about it? Like, how fast can you be?
Depends on if they have the infrastructure for it or not. But
Right.
assuming it's someone who's already in the WordPress hacking space and therefore already has like a botnet for spamming out attacks and such,
Mhm.
minutes.
Minutes. Yeah.
It-
So that's
yeah.
great. That's good to know. So how fast can you update, right? So it's,
Yeah. And oftentimes, I mean, of course, if it's an actual 0 day,
yeah,
the exploit's out there before anything knows about it. But even when it's something that's known, often
yeah,
it's not uncommon for the vulnerability to be announced before the developers are able to patch it. Or
right.
it's not uncommon for them to they have other things they're doing too. They might have more important things going on or
Yeah,
be on vacation or whatever. They can't get to it right away. There's
yeah.
always that time window either between developers updating or between the websites updating where things are going down.
So to get back on track with the experiment we did of like, how good hosts actually are. So, I asked, because we had like, I think we had one vulnerability that was 2 years old or something. Or did we, how many of these vulnerabilities that we tested in the second experiment were actually kind of like fresh, so to speak?
All of them were moderately fresh. For the second experiment, since we were focusing, the first experiment was very much the headliner vulnerabilities, right?
Yeah,
So big names, big target, big impact. The
yeah,
second being broader, we wanted to focus on more of what's been happening lately in all of these categories. So
yeah.
all of the second experiment vulnerabilities came from either 2025 or 2024.
I guess a small question. It's like, since we twisted like, well, I think 19 companies in the end, it's like, so how many of them actually advertised? Did they advertise themselves as like super secure, or what was your marketing impression when we chose them? Or did we specifically choose like the ones that were loudest about being secure?
We kind of chose a randomish mixture.
Okay.
We chose a lot of big names, and of course, all of the big names say they're very secure. There are
Of
some that
course.
were much louder about it, and some that were quieter about it. But we chose kind of all over the spectrum of how the hosts advertised.
Yeah.
Generally, what we saw is honestly, a lot of the hosts with the bigger advertising budget didn't do very well.
Yeah.
I remember one host particularly, they huge letters, whole page, secure WordPress hosting. And then you
Yeah.
scroll down and they're talking about how they can secure their environment and how the server is secure, which is a very
Hmm.
good thing. Don't get me wrong, but it's not
Hmm.
going to secure your WordPress. And that's the fine print is what we saw a lot with the companies that were advertising security is they'll give you a secure box, but they're not actually securing the WordPress itself.
Is that misleading the customer though? At what point does it become like you're lying to your customer versus you're twisting the truth?
That's a really great question. And frankly, that's one that couldn't quite give you the answer to. I think there is elements of both sides. Some of these companies, they're offering things like better malware scanning and containerization, which do a much better job of separating your site from everything else on the server.
Mhm.
And that's great. That's actually really good. I've seen
Mhm.
so many instances of we call it cross contamination, where either like shared hosting, your one
Yeah.
account, we've got 3 websites on it, or there's like 30 websites all running on the same box on the same Linux server. And a good virus, a good malware can jump between websites or
Yeah.
potentially even jump between different accounts on the server and infect the whole thing.
So, but maybe as a final question, I'll ask you this. So, okay, we have this, I would say deceptive marketing, and
Yeah.
just like solutions that really aren't doing much to protect against vulnerabilities. What are you supposed to do as a customer? So, if you're like a agency, even or like shop owner, e-commerce store owner, how do you like see through the BS, or like how can you figure out like, is this host actually detecting me, and if it's not, what am I supposed to do? So that's like the big question.
Honestly, is you've got to look at what companies are doing something on the application layer. And the answer is none of the
Mhm.
hosting companies are. Um,
Yeah,
Now, of course, saying that some companies are moving towards it. There
yeah,
are companies and solutions that like we partner with, which we
yeah,
do exist on the application layer, of
yeah,
course. And that's the thing is going it as a user buying hosting. I think at this point, the best way to look at it is your hosting company is not going to protect you. They're just
yeah.
not. Look for ones that are offering security solutions on their layers. We mentioned this in our original article, the Swiss cheese model, where
Okay.
firewall will block some vulnerabilities, malware will block some vulnerabilities, will block some vulnerabilities on the application layer. Look for a host that has a good firewall that has a secure hosting environment because they are giving you good building blocks for that. But past
Mm.
that, the next what someone would really want to do is either look for a host that partners with a company like us or add us directly to their site because no one is really blocking that application layer
Yeah.
besides, well, us.
Yeah. Well, there you have it. I think that's what's the takeaway. It's kind of alarming news, right? But I wanted to say thank you for obviously doing the test. That was a big one. Really alarming results because again, like 77% of attacks just like going through like a hot knife through butter is not amazing. If anybody listening, if you want to read more, details about how this study was done, what exactly we tested, what type of vulnerabilities, we're not going to name the hosts. We're not going to do naming and shaming because probably the overwhelming vast majority of hosting companies in the world currently are not good with this. We'll give you some details about like which layers or like which tools we tested that claim to be secure, but they're really not effective against vulnerabilities. So if you want to see that, either check the link in the comments or maybe on the screen here. Just give the full study a read. And thank you for watching.